Hi, I'm Michael Marin, President and CEO of Holy Name Medical Center. At Holy Name, we believe that all citizens need to be informed about the healthcare issues that affect their lives. That's why we're proud to support important healthcare programming produced by the Caucus Educational Corporation.
Funding for this edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been provided by NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology, Holy Name Medical Center. This place is different. The North Ward Center, the Russell Berry Foundation, PSE&G, committed to providing safe, reliable energy now and in the future. The law firm of Gibbons, P.C. And by ADP, a comprehensive provider of human resources technology and services. Promotional support provided by NJ Biz, all business, all New Jersey. And by New Jersey Globe.
This is One-on-One. I'm an equal American just like you are.
The jobs of tomorrow are not the jobs of yesterday.
Look at this. You got this?
Here it is, man. Look at it.
Life without dance is boring.
I don't care how good you are or how good you think you are, there is always something to learn.
Do you enjoy talking politics?
No.
People call me because they feel nobody's paying attention.
Our culture, I don't think, has ever been tested the way it's being tested right now.
Such a good question. High five.
Welcome to One-on-One. I'm Steve Adubato. We're coming to you from the Agnes Varus NJTV studio in beautiful Brick City, Newark, New Jersey. My pleasure to introduce Eric Marcus, founder and host, Making Gay History, the podcast. How you doing?
Great. Great to be here.
Where's the idea for this come from, Making Gay History, the podcast?
The podcast is drawn from an archive that I recorded 30 years ago for an oral history book about the gay civil rights movement, what was then called the Gay and Lesbian Civil Rights Movement. And I saved all of my tapes. That's 300 hours of interviews, and donated my collection to the New York Public Library. They digitized the entire collection. And then in 2015, when I was trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life, I checked in to see if they digitized the collection, which they had. And it started out as a small education project, and my producer said, this sounds like a podcast. And we went from there. We literally launched the podcast in 5 weeks after being taken under the wing of a company called Pineapple Street Media. They are sort of the hottest podcast production company. And their principal, Jenna Weiss-Berman, loved the audio that she heard, this archival audio. And I thank my 30-year-old self every day that I used broadcast quality equipment 30 years ago when I did all of those interviews.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I thought these stories would be important. I interviewed people who had been at the very start of the movement, who had been there at the beginning, and they were old. And I also interviewed a lot of people who had AIDS, and I knew they were going to die. So I thought, someday someone's going to want to use these tapes for something, but I never expected to be the one to mine my own archive.
It's so interesting you're saying this. And I'm going to come from left field on this.
Sure.
My wife and I were watching a series called The Deuce. Mm-hmm. James Franco.
42nd Street, yep.
Yeah. So I know it's not it is a fascinating show. Check it out. Every once in a while we could talk about something not on PBS. But I have to tell you, much of it is not only about the history of pornography, it's about the history of the gay rights movement as well, and how AIDS moved into the 1980s. Am I getting that wrong?
No, not really, because some of the key people who...
And New York City at that point.
Yeah, some of the key people featured in my podcast, Sylvia Rivera, Marsha B. Johnson, who made their living on the streets. These were kids. These were street kids who were hustlers on 42nd Street in the 1960s. And it's very hard to imagine what their lives were like. And I had the privilege to interview both Sylvia and Marsha. And most people haven't heard their voices.
So play this out for a second.
Yeah.
I know we're going to run a clip in just a second.
Yeah.
So, you know, our boys are teenage boys, and I think about a lot of other folks, kids who say, why are we even talking about gay rights? What are you talking about? They don't acknowledge it. They don't see.
It means nothing.
They go, what's the problem? I don't even get it. And I go, wow, I'm glad.
Right.
But I'm also thinking, wow, do they need to know?
Well, it's changed so fast and it's not taught. So for people my age and your age, we remember what the world was like back then. But when I interviewed the people who were at the beginning of the movement, their world was a mystery to me. I couldn't believe the worlds in which they lived in, where they literally had never heard the word homosexual. They didn't know what one was. They just knew they were different and knew no one else.
How bad? How bad was it?
It was rough for it was a range of experiences. I interviewed one man from whose story goes back to 1920. He was diagnosed at age 16 at the Mayo Clinic as a homosexual.
Diagnosed.
Diagnosed. His dad thought he was gay. They sent him to the Mayo Clinic. But his parents embraced him. So you hear a range of experiences. 1920. Yeah. Parents love their kids.
We sure do.
Yeah, and so for a lot of parents, it was they wanted to protect their kids from what the larger world was like. But it was very challenging. It's still challenging today for a lot of young people.
It is.
I grew up in Queens, and I went back to my high school to speak a couple of years ago. And the immigrant kids especially had a challenging time because the out gay kids at school, because they weren't out to their families and couldn't be because the communities they came from were traditional conservative
But out in
communities.
school?
Out in school.
But not at home?
No.
There are
It's
other
too
kids out at
dangerous.
home and not at school. It's so
Right.
interesting.
Right. Well, this is a group of girls who spoke with
Okay.
me. The boys hung back, and I asked the girls, "Why? Who are those boys?" They said they're gay kids, but they're too afraid to be identified at school. Yeah.
Wow. Let me try this. I said this before we got on the air, Eric. You know, I remember seeing the Harvey Milk documentary many years ago. Check it out. It's extraordinary. And also do some real research on who Harvey Milk was. Not a part of the research you're doing, but an incredibly important figure out in San Francisco. So I think Harvey Milk, my kids had no, very few people know. But then I thought Stonewall. 50 years ago, Lower Manhattan in the Village. A, say why it matters. We're looking at Stonewall right now, a picture of it. And B, who the heck knows what Stonewall was and why it means so much?
Right. Well, Stonewall was a key turning point in the LGBTQ civil rights movement. There was a bar in the Village. The police routinely raided gay bars in those days, arrested the patrons. There was this relationship between the police and organized crime because only all the bars were owned and managed by...
But Stonewall not owned by the mob.
Oh, well, it was.
Hold on. Then why were Then why were the cops giving those who were in the bar a hard time if they're owned by the mob?
Because politicians in those days made commitments to clean up the Village or clean up Times Square. So it was really a bit of kabuki. They would go in, raid the bars, impound all the alcohol, take the cash register.
It was a game.
It was a game.
What happened that night, if you will, that things got out of control?
It was a different night. In that the police went in very late. Actually, it was the early morning hours of June 28th, 1969. Normally, they went in early in the evening. People had been drinking. There were a lot of young people out on the street that night. It was a Saturday night. It was a hot night, full moon. Actually, it was a Friday to Saturday. And it started out really as a bit of a show. The police went in. Patrons were sent on their way, except for the ones who were wearing, you won't believe this, but you could be arrested for wearing, if you weren't wearing 3 articles of clothing appropriate to your gender.
1969.
Yeah, you could be arrested. So for the guys who were at the bar who were not dressed in, didn't have 3 articles of clothing appropriate for their gender, they were held back. But as people left the bar, the people who gathered on the street were cheering their friends on, and it was a bit of a game. But then some people started throwing coins. And this was a mystery to me. Several people explained to me that people were throwing coins at the police. And I said, what was that about?
Did that imply they were being paid off by the mob?
You came for your payoff, here's some more. So
my God. It just hit me that what you were saying.
Yeah. And it didn't hit me until Sylvia Rivera explained it to me. And so it escalated from there. And then someone broke a window. And it's very hard to describe how a riot actually happens. But a lot of things happen in different places. And then there was it was a confrontation with the police. People were sick of the police raiding the bars.
Enough is enough.
Enough is enough.
What impact, I'm sorry for interrupting, what impact did it have longer term?
It led to a huge explosion in organizing in the gay rights movement. The movement was a small movement up until '69, maybe 40 to 60 organizations across the country. It was founded in 1950 in Los Angeles with an organization called the Mattachine Society. After '69, and it didn't happen instantaneously that there was an explosion, but by the end of the first year, after Stonewall, there were 1,500 gay organizations across the country. So it was an enormous explosion.
But a name just jumps out to me. Kramer, Larry Kramer? Was it Larry Kramer? You know what I'm talking about? It's very involved. Let me tell you where I'm going with this.
Yeah, go ahead.
The AIDS crisis.
Yeah, Larry Kramer was later.
Yes.
Larry was the 1980s.
Okay, but the people you interviewed for over what period of time? I want to be clear on this, because I always thought he was a key player, but he was involved in the AIDS movement.
He was, yes. So I did interview Larry in 89.
Oh, you did?
Yeah,
okay,
I did.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
The people I interviewed were involved in the movement from 1950. The piece that we're going to play from the podcast.
Okay, set it up.
Yeah,
You're a broadcaster. You set it up. It's late in the day. Go ahead, just do it.
It's a guy named Frank Kameny. He was fired from his job in the Army Map Service in 1957. It was part of you probably never heard of the Lavender Scare.
No.
It was concurrent with the Red Scare.
Okay, I'm sorry.
President Eisenhower signed an executive order in 1953 barring gay people from federal employment. Thousands of gay people lost their jobs. People killed themselves. They were ruined. Frank lost his job in 1957. He was a Harvard PhD. He was an astronomer. So he was one of the rare people who fought back, tried taking his case to the Supreme Court. They didn't want to hear it. So he founded an organization in 1961, a new militant organization, which was a version of a group called the Mattachine Society. He led the first public protest in front of the White House and the State Department and the Pentagon in 1965. So we're going to hear a clip of Frank talking about what the gay rights movement was like in 1965 and his view on what homosexuality was.
Great setup. Let's check it out.
The movement of those days was a very unassertive, apologetic, defensive kind of structure, not taking strong positions, giving a hearing to everybody and saying all views must be heard, even those which were most harshly and viciously condemnatory. As long as it dealt with homosexuality, they must be given a fair hearing. Drivel.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so Frank had this.
That was him with Obama, President Obama.
Yeah, so Frank first, he loses his job in 1957, and he becomes a hero of the movement. He was somebody who believed that you could brand gay people. He came up with the slogan, "Gay is good, patterned on black is beautiful." That was before Stonewall. And he was one of the few leaders of the movement in the 1960s. It was called the homophile movement, who survived into the 70s and was one of the people who helped get homosexuality removed from the list of mental illnesses, which was in the DSM, the APA's.
Yeah, whatever that diagnosis thing is. It's official.
Yes, and if you are designated as mentally ill, you can't be a teacher, you can't be a lawyer, you can't be a policeman.
By the way, can we thank the New York Public Library for those pictures, right?
Yes, it's their digital archive, and all of my tapes are with the New York Public Library.
Eric, let me ask you.
Yep.
This research, this passion, this work, what we're showing people right now, how beyond professional, how deeply, deeply personal is this to you?
I feel an enormous responsibility to the people I interviewed whose stories had not been told, to bring these stories to life again. Now, I did it in a book 30 years ago. Well, in 1992, the first edition was published. And I'm not really a spiritual person or religious, but I like to think that the people I interviewed weren't satisfied with seeing their words in print. They wanted their voices to be heard. So somehow they got me to do this work all over again 30 years later and do it as a podcast so that people can hear their voices and hear their stories. These people provide a roadmap today. It's not just history. It's a roadmap for people today fighting for their rights. And the LGBTQ civil rights movement continues on, and there are backlashes, and you have to continue pushing forward. And these people did it at a time that was far more challenging than it is now. And they inspire me every day.
I know we're out of time, but I have to do this.
Yeah.
With the degree of intolerance and the chasm in the country and the polarization, the hatred on the part of many, does that have anything to do with this conversation?
Sure it does. But when I'm asked about what I think the world is like for gay people today, I always say these are the best of times. There's always backlash when people move forward, so I'm not surprised by that. What's a little surprising is seeing it coming from the highest levels of the government. But I have enormous hope, especially for the young people I hear from all over the world. Just had an email from a girl in Kentucky today who started a GSA, at Gay Straight Alliance, at her high school in rural Kentucky. Mm-hmm. They have several dozen kids who are part of the organization, and it's because she discovered these voices in the Making Gay History podcast.
Eric, thank you. I'll cut you off, I'm sorry.
No, these stories have the power to move people today, even though these are people who lived decades ago, most of whom are no longer living. That stories have enormous power. And that's what I find so inspiring about the work that I've been privileged to do. Thanks for having me on your show.
It's an honor to have you. We'll be right back right after this. Thank you.
Thanks.
To watch more One-on-One with Steve Adubato, find us online and follow us on social media.
We're honored to be joined by Mark Barden, co-founder and managing director, Sandy Hook Promise. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Steve.
So, describe what Sandy Hook Promise is.
How much time do we have?
Take as much time as you want.
I say that because we set out on a bold undertaking, and it's a very simple premise, but we want to prevent other families from having to live through the trauma and the devastation of gun violence and the impact that has.
So back on, obviously, December 14, 2012, the horrific events at Sandy Hook Elementary School, you and so many other parents devastated by the outcome, the impact of that horrible situation.
Yeah.
Your son, Daniel, 7 at the time?
He was 7, yeah.
We're going to be showing some pictures of Daniel.
Thank you.
So what I'm curious about is that you made a decision to dedicate your life to doing what you're doing right now, prevention, helping others, and so they don't go through what you and your family have gone through and so many others. Mm-hmm. But why? Why not just say you...
Yeah, that's a good question, because as you can imagine, there are many days still that it's a challenge just to get out of bed. But I have to stay committed to my family, to my wife, Jackie, my son, James, and my daughter, Natalie, to provide as much love and normalcy as I can for them. But also I feel that I have to honor my little Daniel, and I have to protect my James and Natalie from this devastation. And I know that what I'm doing with Sandy Hook Promise is making a difference, and I feel it's a very appropriate way to honor my son that way. And I feel that we are absolutely preventing other families from living this pain. And we're building more connected communities and schools across the country in the process.
We're putting up the website as we speak. What are some of the key components of the organization in terms of the prevention efforts? And we're actually going to show a PSA in just a couple of seconds. Go ahead.
We decided early on that we needed to occupy a different space in the gun violence prevention movement. And we really focus on prevention. We empower students with free trainings where they'll learn how to recognize at-risk behavior in their peers, and then give them the tools to connect them to the help that they need before it becomes something more serious or it escalates to violence.
You're actually in the schools right now.
We are actually in the schools with free programs.
Describe what a program could look like.
So let's take our Say Something program. It trains students who are the eyes and the ears in social media platforms what to look for with regard to any host of potential at-risk behaviors in their peers. We have learned through research that people talk about it first before they hurt themselves. They talk about it first before they commit an act of violence, and usually to more than one person. And very often that lives in the social media platforms where the kids are the eyes and the ears. So we train them to look for those behaviors.
Excuse me for interrupting. What are just a few of them?
We have a whole list we can send you, but they...
So it'll be on the website. Check it out. But tell us a couple.
So change in behavior, withdrawal from their network of friends, changing a network of friends, isolation, bullying, being bullied, are some of the markers that we have learned can be indicators of at-risk behavior and somebody that may be on their way of to hurt themselves or somebody else.
And what could and should some of those other children do?
We train the kids to connect that individual to a trusted adult. May not be their parents, it might be a coach, faith leader, but we also have given them an anonymous reporting system, so it removes the stigma of being a rat or a snitch, and it gives them a safe platform with which to report whatever pathway behaviors they may observe, which goes to a trained crisis counselor who can then intervene, take those next steps, whatever it may be. It might be just alerting the school to have a conversation with this individual, or it might be a life safety issue where they need immediate help.
So there's a program or initiative, I don't know what it is, it's simply called Say Hello. Daniel, your son, said hello to everyone?
Teachers used to tell us that if Daniel noticed somebody sitting alone or having a hard day, that he would ask to sit with them or check in on them, make sure they're okay.
I'm sorry, I'm looking at your son as you're talking. Go ahead.
Daniel had a wonderful capacity for compassion that was just wired into him somehow.
At 7?
At 7. We used to call him an old soul. He was a wonderfully compassionate little boy. And so our Start with Hello program trains students to do just that, to notice somebody who is hurting or feeling invisible or isolated, and just to connect with them and make them feel validated. And that can be the first step toward changing that course of that somebody might be on toward being bullied or something more serious.
You know, for those of us who have school-age children, and we think about this a lot, and you've experienced the worst possible outcome. When you talk to other parents, I can't imagine how difficult it is for you, but it seems to me you feel you have a deep personal responsibility.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair. I definitely do. You know, Daniel used to look out for everybody, from the ants and the worms right on up to his peers and adults, and I feel a absolutely very serious responsibility to carry that forward in my work.
Mm-hmm. You know, there's a public service announcement that we're going to show right now. It's called Back to School Essentials. Is that what
Yeah.
it is? Let's just check it out, and Mark and I will keep talking right after this.
This year, my mom got me the perfect bag for back to school.
These colorful binders help me stay organized.
These headphones are just what I need for studying.
These new sneakers are just what I need for the new year.
This jacket is a real must-have.
My parents got me the skateboard I wanted. It's pretty cool.
These scissors really come in handy in art class. These colored pencils, too.
These new socks, they can be a real lifesaver.
And I finally got my own phone to stay in touch with my mom.
So, Mark, some might ask the question, where is the line between preparation, prevention, and quote-unquote scaring kids? It's way too late, isn't it, to be talking about scaring kids?
Yeah, they're already scared.
They are.
They're being exposed to this in their schools. My daughter, Natalie, is a senior in high school. In the first week, she had to endure lockdown drills, active shooter drills. My wife is an elementary school teacher.
She is.
Same thing. So they're already exposed to this. They're already being scared by these realities. And I refuse to accept this as our new normal. And this is why we need to inspire adults. We need to pull them into this conversation. And I know this is graphic and I know this is hard, but you know, we're not going to sanitize school shootings. And we need to have this conversation. We need to get people engaged in this. And we need to teach them that this is preventable. And we do have a model that works, and we need folks to bring these trainings into their schools, and we can set this back where kids don't have to make this part of back to school, is to train for an active shooter. They should be excited about their new books and getting back to school and not having to worry about being shot.
So for some of us who have told our kids, I remember telling our daughter the other day, she said something about this topic. And I remember just saying, oh, Olivia, you have nothing to worry about. And I realized I was saying that because I didn't know how to talk to her. That may not be, again, I don't want to belabor this, but a lot of us don't know how to talk about this.
Right, and we shouldn't have to know how to talk about the potential of being shot.
But they ask.
Well, they ask because it keeps coming up in the news. We keep seeing this happen. And I'm convinced that schools are still probably one of the safest places where our kids can be.
Right.
We know that. But our schools have decided that because of what has been happening, that they need to train the students on how to respond to an active shooter. What we want to do is we want to train the students how to learn how to identify the warning signs and get individuals to the help that they need before this happens. And over time, as we sustain these programs in schools, we know that we can get to a place in our culture where we don't have to be training students how to respond to an active shooter.
And a few seconds left. Mark, you're not that, when it comes to sensible gun laws, that's not your fight. This is your focus.
We work mostly in prevention. We absolutely support universal background checks. We absolutely support extreme risk protection orders, which are the legislative counterpart to the work that we do in training people how to recognize warning signs and taking steps to prevent tragedies.
But acting like it's not a real problem, acting like we're not going to talk about it, not showing that PSA is not part of the solution.
It helps nobody to turn away and to pretend it's not really happening.
I'm sure you've heard this many times before, and I hope it doesn't sound in any way like a cliche, but we cannot thank you enough, the public television family, everyone who's watching you right now, for what you and your family and your colleagues have chosen to do at Sandy Hook Promise.
Thank you.
I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
See you next time.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by NJIT, Holy Name Medical Center, the North Ward Center, the Russell Berry Foundation, PSC&G, the law firm of Gibbons PC, and by ADP. Promotional support provided by NJ Biz and by New Jersey Globe. Transportation provided by Airbrook Limousine, serving the metropolitan New York, New Jersey area.
When it comes to you and your family's health care, transparency is key. At Holy Name Medical Center, we believe in creating an environment where patients can be educated and informed so they can get the most out of their health care. As New Jersey's healthcare industry continues to evolve and change, Holy Name remains committed to providing patients with high-quality, accessible, and affordable health care.